In 1939, a company in a small Ohio town built a lathe so precise it could cut metal to tolerances thinner than a human hair. It weighed more than 3,000 pounds, ran on vacuum tubes, and looked like something from science fiction. Within 2 years, the US government was buying them by the dozen and sending them to classified facilities around the country. Because before the atomic bomb could be built, the uranium had to be shaped with geometric perfection. And this lathe, the Monarch 10E, could do what no other machine on Earth could do then. The company behind it, Monarch Machine Tool Company of Sidney, Ohio, would go on to arm 2 world wars, pioneer technologies that change factory work everywhere, and build what machinists still call the finest manual lathe ever made. The man who led it for 45 years was a 28-year-old widower with no engineering background and no children. He called his workers family, he cut his own pay during the Depression, and he drowned at the company's own recreation club while still serving as chairman. So how did a 10-person shop on a dirt road in Western Ohio become the most important lathe builder in the Western Hemisphere? And why did it collapse after nearly a century of dominance? The roots of Monarch Machine Tool Company run deeper than most histories admit. Its lineage goes back to 1882, when Benjamin Sebastian Jr. and Jacob May founded Sebastian May Company in Cincinnati. They built basic engine lathes. In 1890, the Sidney Commercial Club, a booster group in Sidney, Ohio, lured the company there with land and a new factory building. A local businessman named Alan P. Wagner bought out both founders by 1893 and ran the shop himself. Wagner was a machinist, not a businessman. When the economy turned against him in the late 1890s, he moved the whole operation to Detroit on a loan from his wife's cousin, a Sidney dry goods merchant named Ignatius Henry Thediak. Thediak owned a department store, sat on half the boards in town, and had helped form the Sidney Commercial Club in the first place. He was the kind of small city industrialist who understood that factories were the lifeblood of a Midwestern town. When Wagner could not repay the loan, Thediak foreclosed. He hauled the machinery and engineering drawings back to Sidney in 1908. On October 4th, 1909, Monarch Machine Company opened in a brand new 9,960 square foot shop on North Oak Avenue. The DAK was president. Wagner's brother was vice president. 20 men built the first lathe that same month, a basic 14-inch swing engine lathe, and shipped it before Christmas. It was a modest start. The shop was small, the product line was narrow, and the company had no reputation outside Shelby County. But Thediak had one more move to make, and it would change everything. In the spring of 1912, Thediak hired a 28-year-old former salesman from the National Cash Register Company in Dayton. His name was Wendell E. Whipp. He had no engineering training. He had never built a machine tool. What he had was training in John H. Patterson's legendary NCR sales system, which at the time was considered the most advanced commercial training program in American industry. Patterson taught his salesmen profit sharing, group insurance, employee welfare programs, and above all, the belief that a product's quality was inseparable from the organization that built it. Whipp had married Thediak's daughter, Inz. She died of pneumonia shortly after the wedding. He was 28 years old, a widower hour with no children, and he never remarried. He poured everything into the company. For the next 45 years, Monarch was his whole life, and he called the workforce the Monarch family. Under Whipp, the philosophy changed immediately. Instead of competing on price with bigger shops in Cincinnati and Cleveland, Monarch began over-engineering its lathes, more cast iron, heavier beds, tighter tolerances. Whipp understood something that would define the company for the next 80 years. Rigidity and accuracy command a premium. A cheap lathe cuts metal. A Monarch held metal to a standard. By 1917, with the Allies desperate for munitions, Monarch was shipping more than 2,000 lathes a year. Revenue topped $1 million. By 1918, production hit 3,000 lathes for the year, and Sidney, Ohio, a town most Americans had never heard of, was one of the most important manufacturing hubs in the country. The 1920s became Monarch's first golden age. The entire machining world was undergoing a transformation, and Monarch's engineers were leading it. For decades, machine shops had been organized around a single central power source, usually a steam engine, that drove every machine in the building through an overhead network of leather belts and line shafts. If the central engine went down, the entire shop stopped. Monarch was among the first lathe builders to cut that cord by putting independent electric motors directly into each machine base, but the real breakthroughs were happening inside the headstock. In 1923, Monarch engineers Fred Dickis and Pete Bickle developed the first helical-geared lathe headstock in the United States. Hel gears run quieter than straight-cut spur gears, transfer power more smoothly, and produce a superior surface finish on the workpiece. By 1928, 90% of all Monarchs shipped with helical headstocks. In October 1927, Monarch introduced Timken tapered roller bearings on the spindle at the Cleveland Machine Tool Show. They were the first lathe builder in the industry to do so. A year later, they became the first to put anti-friction bearings on every rotating shaft in the machine. In 1929, they introduced the flanged spindle nose, and in 1932, forced lubrication of the carriage, apron, and compound. Each change sounds small by itself. Together, they reinvented what a lathe could do. A Monarch from 1932 was a fundamentally different machine than anything the industry had seen 10 years earlier. Then the floor dropped out. The Great Depression hit the machine tool business harder than almost any other American manufacturing sector. When the economy contracts, the first thing manufacturers stop buying is capital equipment. They will keep buying raw materials. They will keep paying wages as long as they can, but nobody orders a new lathe when there is no work to put on it. By 1931, Monarch's order books were empty. Revenue collapsed. Across the Midwest, competitors were declaring bankruptcy, boarding up their factories and throwing skilled men out of work. The obvious move was to lay off the engineering team, conserve cash, and wait for the storm to pass. Whip refused. He cut his own salary by a third and encouraged others to do the same. Then he sent his engineers, led by the brilliant Clifford A. Bickle, to design the machines of the future in a factory with nothing to build. It was an enormous gamble. If the market did not come back, Monarch would burn through its reserves and die. The engineers delivered. In 1930, Monarch introduced the Monarch Keller form turning machine, developed with the Keller Control Company of New York. Monarch held exclusive rights to the Keller tracer control for the life of the patent. A tracer lathe used a physical stylus to follow a template and reproduce complex shapes automatically, and it opened up the die-inking and mold-making industries to Monarch for the first time. In September 1933, they debuted the Magnamatic, their first dedicated high-profile lathe. In 1937, they patented flame-hardened and ground beds, a process that would become a Monarch trademark for the next 60 years. Every one of these innovations came out of the Depression. Every one of them came from engineers who were being paid to think while the factory floor sat silent. And every one of them positioned Monarch to dominate the market that was about to explode. If Monarch is remembered for one machine, it is the 10E Toolmaker's lathe. The first one, serial number E6156, was built on December 21, 1938. Engineering had started just 6 months earlier. Monarch invested nearly $100,000 in development, a staggering sum for a Depression-era lathe company. The specifications came from Western Electric Company in Chicago, who needed a precision lathe for their instrument work. Clifford Bickle designed it. The defining patent number 2,381,422 was filed October 31, 1939, and awarded August 7, 1945. The 10E looked unlike anything the industry had ever seen. Its cast-iron housing was sculpted in the streamlined modern vocabulary of the late 1930s, the same design language as the 20th century limited locomotive and the Pennsylvania Railroad G1 electric. Smooth curves, horizontal banding, teardrop dials. It looked more like industrial sculpture than a machine tool. That was deliberate. Monarch wanted to elevate the tool and die maker, the machinist who makes the tools that make other tools. From shop floor laborer to elite artisan, the 10E was the machine that said this work matters. By any measure, it was absurdly overbuilt. Classified as a 10-inch lathe, meaning it could swing a 10-inch diameter workpiece over the bed, the 10E actually had a 12-inch swing. It weighed 3,250 pounds. Its footprint was only 29 inches by 60 inches. All that mass was engineered to absorb vibration and deliver flawless surface finishes at tolerances of 1/10,000th of an inch. In a trade that measures in millionths, the The 10E was what you reached for when nothing else was good enough. But the most revolutionary feature was the drive. The original 1939 machines used a Sunstrand hydraulic variable speed unit that allowed the operator to dial in any spindle speed from 25 to 2,500 revolutions per minute without stopping to change gears or belts.